Hey everybody, welcome to FBC's So That Missions podcast. So glad you joined us today. Today I'm with Garrett. We're going to talk about how missions impacts our youth and students. And I'm really excited. I hope you enjoy. Hi, and welcome to Season 4 of FBC Missions So That podcast. This is an encouraging place to hear how God is working in and around us. We know that He blesses His people so that they can bless the world around them. Why is God working in our life, church, and community? It's so that through us, the world will know that He is near. Hey everybody, this is Pastor Chad. We're so glad that you joined us today on our podcast. Having my guest with me today is Pastor Garrett. He's been here at FBC longer than me, so it's super fun to have you in the room. How are you doing, Garrett?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me. This is kind of like a lifelong dream. I've always wanted to be on a podcast.
Lifelong dream.
I love this.
Listen, this is where dreams come true. This is it's what we do here
in the upstairs of the youth building.
It's like 90 degrees in here today, so a little warm.
You get a sauna action, and you get
sauna
to record
and
a podcast. It's multi-use.
Everything that you ever wished for. Well, man, it's been a long time coming. Like we have, at this point, 54 episodes, which is super cool.
It's insane.
And really has gone a lot further, faster than I ever anticipated. Lots of great stories. And I invited you to be here because I really want to include you in these stories. So much of what we do in FBC missions, especially our mission trips, revolves around our students, engaging our youth and young adults. And so, man... You've been really involved in that for the last several years. And so I want to just talk to you a little bit about how missions impacts our student life. And so let's just start. Excuse me. How long have you been here at FBC? Let's start there.
Yeah, so I've actually been here for a little over 4 years now. We graduated college in 2020, got married in 2020, and moved 300 miles away from all of our family, all in the same month to come here.
All in the same month.
And so it really was a God thing, though. We got to kind of create our own little life down here and make community and jump straight into full-time ministry. And it's been a blessing.
That's awesome. So how old are you and Christine?
I am 25. I'll turn 26 this year. Christine just turned 25 in June. So a little bit apart.
You were a youth pastor at 21?
I was a part-time youth pastor in college at DBU. Part-time, I say with air quotes, because it's just part-time pay. There's no such thing as part-time ministry, right? And so I was serving there bivocationally while I was in college. So I actually started when I was 19, and then I was 20. I turned 21. I was 21 when I got here. So, and I was the associate youth minister first, and then I want to say about a year and a half, 2 years later, Will Crum, who was over me, stepped away and took a job in Tennessee and then transitioned, and now we're here. So
you've been doing this role, youth pastoring, since 2022, 2021? Something
like that. I want to say it was either December of 21 or December of 22. December of 22 sounds more accurate, I think.
Okay, I got here in November of 2022. So you were definitely started before I got here. That's when we hired Will, the associate.
Yeah, so it must have been, if you were November of 22, it was December of 21.
Yeah, I think
that tracks. There we go. We figured it
out.
There
we go. We got it figured out. So tell me a little bit, before you came to FBC, had you gotten to be involved in any mission trips? Do you have any history of missions before FBC?
Honestly, very little. Like, we went to one when I was in student ministry. We did Mission Arlington, which was about 30 minutes away from our church in Dallas, Red Oak, Texas. And I loved it. But our church, we were not, it wasn't even really the affluence of the church. For whatever reason, our church just didn't do a ton of mission work.
Sure.
They had one trip to Honduras, but I never went. We didn't have a ton of money growing up, so even had we had those opportunities.
Sure.
And then throughout school, I was putting myself through school and just busy working a couple jobs, RA, and so I never got to take advantage of any of DBU's mission trips. And so my first international mission trip was actually 2 years ago. The first time I went to our Mexico trip was the very first one. And so
I think I was with you. I was with you on that trip.
Yeah, so you were on my first international mission trip.
That's amazing.
And
that's amazing.
It was fantastic. And so it's been cool as I've gotten to lead these trips and be a part of them. I think they've been almost as formative to me as the team that I'm supposed to be leading. And it's been a really cool experience.
Well, I want to talk about that. But before I do, just introduce your family a little bit. So you have a new family. I mean, you guys are young, so tell us about that.
We got started early. We have a 2-year-old daughter named Layton, who is the life of every party.
Yeah, she's like the doll of the youth ministry.
She is the mascot, absolutely. And she knows it too. That's the dangerous part. And then we have a 5-month-old boy named Michael, who is polar opposite of her in looks and personality, like much more reserved. But we'll see how long that lasts with Big Sister. So
yeah, Big Sister, and an extremely busy social life with the youth ministry and all.
Layton thinks she's a teenager at this point.
Yeah, of course.
She's convinced.
She's got, you said 140 students that are ready to wait on her on a Wednesday night.
And they do.
And they do. And there's a few that really do.
And, we got built-in babysitters.
Built in and highly attentive. It's pretty awesome. So let's talk about that. You said that the mission trip was really transformative for you. It was something that shaped you. So tell me about that. Before you get maybe tell me what your expectations before leaving. Like, what did you think you were getting yourself into? And you're like, we're going to take this team to Mexico. I think we took 35 people that year. It was a big trip. Crazy trip. A lot of wildness on that trip, especially when it comes to the housing and arrangements. There was a lot of deviating from our plan.
Power just decided to go out on this
all the time, in and out all week.
Yeah, it was great. I don't think I came in with a ton of expectations. Honestly, I didn't really know what to expect. I'd heard a lot of stories because obviously the legend of the Mexico trip is large here at FBC, and for good reason.
20 plus years of that partnership, and almost every year. I think the only year they didn't do it was COVID year. And, and there seems to be great regret on that.
That was the one year we couldn't, and so I didn't come in with a ton of expectations, or really. Honestly, that first trip, I was really just trying to soak it in and try to learn and see what's going on, and I just tried to come in just like, all right, let's see what this looks like, because I had no framework for it at all. Yeah. I mean, that was the second time I've been out of the country in general.
So tell me a little bit, like, in some ways, this is really exciting. I mean, how often do you get to talk to a pastor and kind of think through their initial interaction with a trip that's international? I mean, there's a lot of different scenarios we could put you in, but like that was the first one that you you experienced. So what were some of the takeaways? What were the big impacts for you? Maybe surprises, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you always hear about when you go and you encounter things that you do in the places where we serve in missions, the poverty, the hurt, the brokenness. I feel like a lot of times I expected to go and get this sense of like gratitude for all that God's blessed me with. But when I showed up, for whatever reason, that wasn't the takeaway. I looked at these people and I looked at the joy that they had. I think of the Bennies of the world. I think of the Darius. I think of the people I got to interact with. There's a woman named Elena that was from this most recent trip. And whether they're a pastor who's got slightly better living conditions or there's somebody who's in the squatters' villages, like there's just a joy that permeates them. And so for me, I don't think the takeaway was so much of like, hey, I should be grateful for what I have, but like maybe stuff should not be the measuring stick for contentment and fulfillment, because a lot of the people I met down there didn't have a lot as what we would consider, stuff. And they were the most joyful people I've ever met. And so it just kind of challenged me in that way, because it's easy to kind of let that slide, and you live in a very affluent town that has a lot of stuff and a lot of things, and you can kind of just start to keep up with the Joneses in a sense here in Boerne.
For sure. The affluence of Hill Country just outside of San Antonio is pretty remarkable.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot to that. A few weeks ago I was talking, at our church we've got some people here that have some resources, and some of them have these beautiful houses, and some of them have ranches even, and big properties, and so I was interacting with one of them, and I was just marveling because he was telling me that since he's been in the house, and it's this big, beautiful house that they built, it's just gorgeous. He's like, we have mice and sometimes rats, and he's somewhere like how he's got these traps and he's trying to catch them, and it just makes you laugh. You're like, there are issues that everyone deals with. Oh yeah, the size of your house, the type of exquisite whatever decor, flooring, siding, everything that like all of that is kind of irrelevant. I mean, it all costs. So there's obviously a massive cost But people living in a one-room shanty town can find and be content with their life. And someone that has everything can be not content with their life. And in the middle of it, you have bugs and scorpions and snakes and rats and mice, and you have flat tires and you have car problems, and like all those things are just part of everyday life. So really the difference between being rich and poor has to do with the way that you really experience fulfillment in your life. And of course, if you have richness and you have a lot of resources, then maybe you can buy those comforts to some degree. Whether you can enjoy them or not is still secondary. And so, that's a huge takeaway. What else stood out to you?
Man, I think kind of we talked about like how it impacts students and everything, and I'm kind of getting into like this year's trip a little bit now, but just the value it has for students, especially in our context. We were kind of just talking about Boerne's this affluent town. I truly believe one of the biggest strongholds that we face here as a student ministry and as a church as a whole is religion. Cultural Christianity is rampant in Boerne. I heard it from a sermon I listened to a while back. It's almost like there's people who are inoculated to Christianity. So in the same way that you get a little bit of the dead stuff that keeps you from getting the real stuff in a vaccine, we get a little bit of the cold, dead religion, and it causes us to miss the real thing. Yeah,
people talk about calloused hearts kind of concept. Where you're so accustomed to hearing the same things over and over again that you just can't hear the truth behind it or the spirit behind it.
Yeah, and so understanding that's our context, watching kids who have grown up in maybe Christian homes under good biblical teaching just be pulled out of that Boerne bubble and witness, hey, this is the real world. Like, you guys live in the 1% of the 1%, and this is not everybody's experience. And to see that change them from the inside out is just incredible to watch, and the impact that has on them, and what it looks like for them to just take a week away from their busy lives and really genuinely pursue the Lord. Like, hey, you've got kids who go on that trip who have never really consistently read their Bible before, and you have a week where they're taking a quiet time every single morning. They're praying, then they're going out and they're living out their faith, and they come back and they're like, man, that was the best thing ever. Like, I felt so full. I felt so alive. And it's not because there's anything necessarily special about Mexico or anything necessarily special about the way we do things on that trip. Like, God there is the same as God here. Yeah. But they're living out their purpose. Like, they're living on mission, and they get to experience that for the first time. And so you pull them out of this consumeristic cultural Christianity and put them into, hey, you're living out your purpose to be salt, to be light, to be healing and love and peace to people and bring the gospel to people. And you get to experience what living is really like. And you get to see, it kind of separates the wheat from the chaff in a way of like, okay, do you want this? Because it's hard. But the kids who really stick to it and are like, man, this is what life is about. How could I do anything else? They just come back changed, and it's just so cool to see.
Yeah, it's super exciting. In my ministry career, I think I've probably led, upwards of 30 or 40 mission trips at this point. Probably a good portion of them, maybe as many as half, has been student oriented. Yeah. So you're taking anyone from 7th grade to 12th grade, every now and then a family that has some younger kids, but the bulk, the kind of big majority of those big trips are those student base, and so many of those impacts are so clear, right? They were the shocking realization that the world that they know doesn't fit the world that they're experiencing during that mission trip, and again, the joy that they see on the faces of these kids that are living on and with so much less.
Yeah.
My very first mission trip, Garrett, was when I was, I think, 11 years old. It may have been 12. And I was too young to go, but my dad was serving as a volunteer youth leader, so they made an exception. He didn't even go with me, but they made an exception. He signed all the papers. I got to go with this mission team. We were living in Arkansas, and we drove, 20 plus hours to Mexico from Arkansas, and
a drive.
Yeah, it's like you guys in Cairo, and we're on these buses and sitting the border in lines for hours, and we were very poor. My family was very poor. You mentioned how your family didn't have a lot of resources. Mine didn't as well. Like, there was a season in our life where we didn't have electricity in our home for like 2 to 3 years. And so I always think about, like, I grew up where the red fern grows, if you've ever read that book, like it's like dirt poor and Ozark Hill Country kind of craziness. And So when I got to Mexico, like I had to raise all the money. We didn't have money, so people sponsored me to go. So I felt, both thankful that people were willing, felt humbled, that somebody was willing to pay for me.
Yeah.
And even the spending money, someone gave me spending money, so I had a little bit. Well, first stop, we got across the border in Mexico. First stop, they let us off to go buy some chips and Cokes or something. And of course, first thing you notice is Coke in Mexico is like a tenth of the cost of the United States. You're like, wow, I could drink a lot of Coke here.
Yeah. Where's this when we
As a 12-year-old, that's a great thing to learn.
Yeah.
And we walked out, and there were these kids that came running up and surrounded us, and they were begging us for money. And one of the kids stuck out his hand, and the skin on his hand, the palm was like peeling. Mm-hmm. And like it shocked me. Like I was a really poor kid from Arkansas. Like I was the least of the whole thing, and I'm standing here looking at someone that has less than me, and I just didn't know what to do with that. It was a moment that was seared into my heart and mind. And those things are happening. Everybody is having those little moments. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, I need to think through this. The hard part is knowing how to like keep those heartbeats, keep those. There's a word from Scripture. It's an Ebenezer.
Yeah.
This. It's in a couple of our hymns, and you throw it out there every now and then. But it's this kind of almost an altar type moment where like I want to remember this. So in the Old Testament they would stack rocks and make here's a pile, and when I see this pile, it's going to remind me that God does like this. Is like Ebenezer moments where God is just kind of almost like he splits time and space and says, I need you to think about this. And mission trips are ripe for it, right? It's why I often say that mission trips are really maybe the best form of discipling your students, your key students, right? You don't take everybody. You take only the ones who are willing to go through all the effort and willing to make that commitment and sacrifice. And so, one of the hardest things is to come back and try to help students walk through what God did. What were those moments on the mission trip that impacted you? So this podcast today with Garrett is really, we're trying to just introduce a little bit of what's coming. We have about, I don't know, somewhere between 7 and 10 or 11 students that want to talk about this mission trip from the summer. And so I know it was a really good trip. We've got just a few minutes here, Garrett. So just give us the introduction of what we're going to talk when we talk about Mexico here from 2024.
Yeah, we had talked a little bit about that first trip. That first trip was fantastic, but for whatever reason, I truly believe, even after the dust has settled, like God showed up in a very unique and powerful way in 2024, in a way that I don't think anybody who went on that trip came back the same person. You had James Smith, who's been leading that trip for 20 years, say, man, this is the most meaningful, impactful trip that I've ever been on. I think to this point in my ministry, it's probably the most meaningful thing I've done in 5 years of doing this. And
that's huge. I mean, you kind of joke like every time you go on a mission trip, it's like, oh, this is the best one ever, you know? So like, but to think about just the impacts that they continue to have is really, really powerful.
Yeah, we've got a group of kids who they've come back different. And it's not just, it's kids we've been praying for. Like it's not your typical Camp High. And there's been follow-up. I mean, the fact that they want to do a podcast, like getting a teenager to get on a video or a podcast is usually like pulling teeth. But it's exposing. Like and it also lasts. You put this stuff on the internet, and it's going to be there for a while. It's going to be there forever. And so I think just the follow-up and the encouragement from seeing them live out their faith has been incredible, and the stories that have lived on, and we're still seeing that impact today. So I'm excited. They're going to tell their stories way better than I possibly could, and the million of stories that could come out of that trip that we got to experience and witness have been just incredible. So I'm excited for people to get to hear it.
Well, that's awesome. Garrett, so there's so much in this. One of the reasons we're doing the podcast, I just want to give people the opportunity to share stories, like stories that really almost Ebenezer moment stories. We could have called the podcast Ebenezer, but I don't know if anybody think Ebenezer Scrooge or something.
Yeah, our numbers might go down if we name it Ebenezer. That's not really optimized for the search engines, you know.
It's not, but it has its own ring to it. It's like you're bringing in some sort of not ancient, an old word, but definitely, one that ties you to the Christmas Carol.
Yeah, you can make it trendy. You put on a hat, get a good font, you can pull it off.
Charles Dickens and Scrooge. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for just coming in for a few minutes. I really, really want this to be a great way for us to capture these stories. One of the things again, I've been doing this for a while now. The first mission trip I led as a minister was somewhere around, had to be about 1999. The first time I led a student group, and I would have been 20 at the time, so the church took a pretty big risk to let this 20-year-old kid take their kids out of the country,
Yeah.
And I learned so much on that trip. But now looking back, I saw so many kids whose lives were impacted on the trips we took over those 3 or 4 years we did it in a row. And some of them have really struggled in their faith since then, and some of them have. But you keep every now and then, some of them were really close to me, so I call them every now and then, like, hey, you remember those days? And they're like, they're, even the ones who are far from God now, they look back and they're like, I don't know what to do with that, because I don't believe what I used to believe, but something was real there.
Yeah,
and you try to pull them back,
yeah.
Remember, just take a second. Remember, God was working in your heart and life, and so again, those moments where God shows up, and you don't know exactly how to deal with it, but it's such an important part. So, brother, like these moments that you're leading these kids on, they're going to be something that you can tie to for the rest of their life, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm in my 40s. I'm not a 20-year-old kid taking kids around the world anymore, but I'm talking to those 30-year-old kids for saying, hey, remember 15 years ago, remember when we went and did those things, and it's something that they have to wrestle through still. Even now, 20 years later, they have very clear memories of what that was, and they're not sure how to define it. Of course, there's some that are in ministry now doing great things, but it's really interesting to me to see how God continues to use these moments in the lives of these students. So, man, keep doing great work, Garrett. Excited to hear how our ministry is growing, how God is opening the hearts of students at Boerne to get to know Him through the ministry here at FBC, through your ministry, and all your volunteers. It's really great work. So, brother, thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Appreciate it, man. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, hey guys, if you're listening, we hope that you've enjoyed this. We know it's a little shorter than normal, but we have a number of bonus episodes that we're going to be putting up over the next several weeks and months, talking to these students, talking to some of our mission trip participants from the summer. And I want you to remember why we're doing this. It's not just so that we can marvel all the cool things that First Baptist is doing, it's so that we can see the great things that God is doing. He is at work. And when we partner with the things He's doing, we all find value. We find things that are everlasting. We find really substance that we can't create or manufacture. And so, man, guys, remember, why did God call us? Why is He using us? Why is He even redeeming us? It's so that we can be a blessing to those around us. Garrett, thank you for being a blessing to those students, and we pray that God would use them for years to come. So all of you listeners, have a wonderful day, and God bless. We are so thankful that you joined our podcast today. We would love to hear any feedback you may have for us. Remember, Psalm 67 says, "May God be gracious to us and bless us, and make His face shine on us, so that your ways may be known on earth and your salvation among all nations." Don't forget why the Lord blesses us. It's so that we can be a blessing to those around us. Until next time, God bless.